I learned this week that apparently there are a number of ways in which we ministers, clergy people, have been talking past some of you. 2 years ago, the Lilly Endowment sponsored some research on the themes of vocation and call related both to clergy and the churches that they serve. And a team discovered a couple of somewhat perplexing things, perplexing at least to ministers. Number one, ministers tend to talk about call or calling as vocation and occupation all at the same time. To wit, I'm part of a clergy group here in New Jersey where the emphasis has been on telling our call stories to one another, which usually boils down to us telling each other how we got the job that we now occupy. There's more to it than that, but ministers are pretty good at combining calling and vocation and occupation. My life is my work is my life, with a few disclaimers, etc., and so on and so forth. Number two, at the same time, it turns out that many members of local congregations that ministers preach within and serve do not relate particularly well to the idea of call as vocation and therefore also occupation. Clergy tend to greatly overestimate the satisfaction and meaning and purpose that people derive from their work, because work for some people is work. Like you have to work at it, with moments of meaning and purpose and enormous pride that come and go within that work. Where do people find their greatest sense of fulfillment, meaning, vocation, call? In their relationships, of course. Even people who identify their work as a source of meaning usually cite their relationships at work as the places that they hold in their heart of particular significance. Which is really bad luck for me, given that today's reading is traditionally formulated as a call story that involves people changing their line of work. Like us, though, these guys worked in a particular place at a particular time, at a particular moment, with particular people occupying particular places of power. When we talk about Herod in the New Testament, we are not always talking about the same person. Herod the Great was around when Jesus was born, but Herod Antipas, one of Herod the Great's sons, is now, as this story is unfolding, the governor or tetrarch of the area. But he is not what he wants to be. What he wants to be is to be like Daddy, who was king of the Jews. You remember that phrase, right? Hail, King of the Jews. The soldiers mock Jesus when Jesus is being executed. And the irony, or part of the irony in that phrase, is that it wasn't Jesus who was ever intent on being the King of the Jews. It was Herod Antipas who was trying his whole life to become King of the Jews, just like his daddy was. There is a whole family drama that happens after Herod the Great dies, because he tells one son that he's giving his seat of power just to him, and then he writes something completely different in his will, and then he changes his will right before he dies, and nobody is sure which will is the real will. Herod the Great needed a much better lawyer, and so problems ensue. One brother is given one bit of land, and Herod Antipas is given another bit of land, and a third brother is given another bit of the region. And the only way you are going to be king of the Jews is to be king by unifying all three pieces. And the only person who can anoint you king of the Jews is the emperor in Rome, who by the year 20 is Tiberius. And the best way to kiss the ring of the emperor in Rome is to do the same thing people have always been doing when they're trying to kiss a particular ring, and that is to generate more money. All of the dramas and aristocracies are played out by the participants as if these things have never happened before. Events are going to be wildly unpredictable and unique, but of course these things play out incredibly predictably. Herod Antipas's primary option is to utilize the natural resources at his disposal. Sure, he could just levy more taxes on the populace, but Tiberius, the emperor himself, said, "It is the part of a good shepherd to shear his flock rather than skin it." What a lovely image. Shearing, of course, in the eyes of the emperor, being good and healthy for the people. So Herod Antipas turns to the Sea of Galilee. Remember, Jesus was the one, as Lindsay alluded to during the children's time, who multiplies fish on Galilee's shores for everyone else's benefit. Well, that is done against the backdrop of Herod Antipas trying to multiply fish for only his benefit. Take the fish, process them, dry them, sell them to the other parts of the empire, raise capital, pay tribute, and Tiberius will make you king of the Jews. Herod Antipas even goes so far as to move the administrative capital of his region to the shores of Galilee, where the fish processing is taking place. He names the new city Tiberias after his emperor. Talk about kissing up, right? And then forcibly moves people to the new city to make it look like it was a thriving place of commerce and activity when, in fact, it was populated by slaves, foreigners, and prisoners who had absolutely no choice in the matter. By the early 20s, Tiberias was in full flow as a city. The early 20s, the time when Jesus was himself in his 20s. By the late 20s, the gospel contends, Jesus moves to Capernaum, up the coast from Tiberias, because no faithful Jew at that time would live in Herod Antipas's den. I look at this story in Matthew 4, and I have often wondered, why doesn't Zebedee put up a fight? Here he is mending nets with his sons. Presumably, he and his sons are the family business. And the text tells us this interloper, Jesus, comes along, one look, and these guys drop everything, and they just follow him down the beach. Magic. In the churches I was instructed in, I learned that the call of Christ works like that. It's magic. One day you do something, and then you do something else. You're called. Epiphanies happen. The real presence sweeps you away. And that may well be true, but at the cost of Zebedee's life? Without his sons, how is he going to feed himself? What happens to him now? So I'm guessing that these guys in this story knew each other already. And I'm guessing that discussions have already happened. And I'm also guessing that Zebedee and the boys are pretty much out of business. And I'm guessing that they are not out on the water fishing because they either aren't catching anything because the fisheries are becoming depleted after years of overfishing by Herod Antipas, or they have to give up their catch to Herod Antipas's processing factory anyway, so why bother? The text even says that Andrew and Peter are casting nets, but it doesn't say that they are actually catching anything. Why doesn't Zebedee fight losing his business? Maybe because there's no business to be had anymore. Psalm 24 sings that the earth is the Lord's and everything in it, but that doesn't stop a wannabe king from overfishing or strip mining or clear cutting or raising in all the predictable ways of a wannabe king, making people work around the clock for his own personal gain. Jesus doesn't just multiply fish from a boy's lunch bag for a party trick. Jesus doesn't tell the fishermen to put down their nets on the other side of the boat in order to take in a great haul because he's a first century David Blaine. He doesn't come to the fishermen on the shores of Galilee after his resurrection and cook fish and have breakfast with them because he's into freaking them out. He doesn't calm a storm on the Sea of Galilee because he wants to be powerful. All of these things are done against the backdrop of Herod Antipas and because he loves the people near him. He multiplies fish because the people near him are hungry. He tells the fishermen to put their nets down on the other side to instill faith and to rebuke the overfishing by Herod Antipas and to show that God is still the provider of food, a providential generosity. He cooks fish because that's what friends do when they are in mourning and they are in community. He calms the storm because on the Sea of Galilee, Herod Antipas might start to look and feel and seem like the boss man, but he is no real boss and he is no real savior and he is not the path to freedom. I want to be clear about one thing, and this is important for me and for us going forward. If you believe that yesterday the protests were much ado about nothing, I love you. In this space and in this community, I love you. I love you, and I hope that as these words come from my lips, they are not just bits of empty rhetoric. If you have no fear, no trepidation, no concerns about what comes next, okay. It's not my job, and it's not ever going to be my job to compel you to feel differently. I love you, and I love you not because I am called to love you, but I think I love you because I actually care about you, and because that's who I want to be. And if I love you, and if you happen to love me too, we had better figure out how to live faithfully now without turning a cold shoulder to those who aren't just nervous about policy. They are living in fear regarding the right here, right now. We were witnesses yesterday. We were witnesses to the fact that there is a good deal of anxiety, and it is the kind of anxiety that always comes when a person believes that two things are fundamentally true. One, that the entire world is completely broken, has endured carnage. And number two, that they alone have the capacity to restore it to wholeness. That is a story older than the Bible itself. I am grateful in a way that Jesus lived in this as well. But of course, our president has far more power than Antipas ever did. I make no secret of the fact that my children are quite good at informing my worldview, not because they have particularly nuanced views, but because they're good at informing me about fundamental priorities. We, Stacy and I, were asked what all the marches were about yesterday. Stacy told our son that the marches were formed in part because of those comments on that bus and what women are purported to want. An 8-year-old boy in the back seat of a car exploded in anger. This cannot stand. That is not okay. Something must be done. That's my son's way of being prophetic. Jesus comes to the shore, and it's time. This egregious manipulation of resources, this vulgarity that comes from Herod Antipas, this plundering cannot continue. They cannot go on like that. That's prophetic too, but it's also pastoral. It's relational, for we see what Jesus is about in his relationships. The primary benefactors of the grace that Jesus gave, his relationships were Andrew and Peter and James and John, and they saw and they witnessed and they felt and they learned that the calling is, as William Stringfellow said, to live from day to day, whatever the day brings, in reconciliation with all people and all things, in this knowledge that death has no more power, in the truth of resurrection. What does it mean now for us to follow Jesus? The one who says, "Follow me." What does it mean now for us to follow as prophets, called to speak and shout, and as people in relationship to one another, called to love as this one did? May God's peace be with you all. Amen.